Well, I guess we ought to get it going. So starting what, with a roll call then? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Brenda Morris. Melanie.
Yes.
Jennifer.
Here.
Ned.
Here.
Wesley.
Here.
Sean. Ron. Alexandra.
Here.
All right.
So we do have a quorum.
I believe so.
That's good.
Yeah. So
And
just,
then, oh, sorry.
oh,
Go ahead,
I was
Sarah.
going to say just Brenda, Sean, and Ron aren't here.
Okay, so we're still able to proceed then, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, does someone want to make a motion then to approve the minutes from last time?
I'll motion to approve minutes from last meeting.
Okay.
I'll
Anyone
second.
second? I
I'll
guess I
second.
can second.
I'll second.
Melanie? Oh, thank you.
Okay. Anything else before we go to the?
Just say, sorry, Ned.
Oh, it's fine.
For everyone to raise their hand if they vote on the motion being passed.
Okay. So are we voting then? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Raise hands for minutes from last time. All right.
Everyone's in favor. Thank you.
That's good. Okay. So is there anything else then before we go to this evening's presentation?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in, Ned, before we started.
Sure.
So our city council has decided that they would like to start doing in-person council meetings and committee meetings beginning in January, or at least offering a hybrid model, or, you know, seeing what the committee's thoughts were on potentially wanting to do in person, or if we wanted to stay virtual. I just kind of wanted to get a feel for how you guys felt, if you would rather just continue on Zoom for the next several meetings starting after January, or if you would like to do a hybrid approach where there was some in person, some on Zoom, or all in person, just knowing that the option is there. But I just didn't know what the committee's thoughts were on that.
Well, I'll put my 2 cents in. In the last cycle, it seemed to me when we had in-person meetings, which were down at the wastewater treatment plant, we had more people from the public showing up earlier in these meetings than we seem to be having right now. True, there seems to be more concern as we get later in, but seems to me we already had at least 1 or 2 people physically in attendance. And I think for that reason, we might consider more in person. But I'm wide open for other comments or recommendations.
I'd be curious as to, is there a vaccination or a mask requirement?
So the city is not doing a vaccination requirement now. I guess that's because of the OSHA ruling that just happened yesterday or today. So we are still requiring masks, and we have 1 space available that would be following the OSHA requirements for distancing. So if we were to go in person, we would be distanced for the OSHA requirements, and we would still be required to mask at all times while in there. But we can't require or ask people of their vaccination status.
Okay.
And just to clarify, the meetings would be held at the water treatment plant, not at City Hall?
No, it would actually be at the public safety building over at the police station.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
They're the only ones that have a space currently that meet the OSHA requirements.
Oh, got it.
That would be available.
Right. That's where the city council used to meet in person, right?
Yes.
Pre-COVID? Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
And it is set up to do a remote session as well. So we could have some people zooming in, watching the meeting, and then some people could just be there in person.
Okay.
If you prefer.
Are there no, since it's a pretty heavily used space, are there no other like committee conflicts on the corresponding Wednesday nights, would it be open then?
It is. I actually checked. It is open for starting January. It would be open those evenings we have reserved.
Okay. So help me out here. What's appropriate? Do we vote on this?
You guys can think about it and maybe come back the next meeting.
That's a
and
good
let
idea.
us know
Okay.
what you would prefer. And we can certainly stay doing Zoom too. That is definitely an option. And, you know, with our consultant, our fee was based on her being totally virtual. So if Deb were to come in person, that would probably increase the cost of her work for us in the city. So she may continue Zooming in for these meetings if you guys wanted to meet in person.
Yeah.
Just depending on how we work things out with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would be in favor of like the hybrid where people could do either or. I think that might work the best. Just give people the option either way. As long as they know, you know, what their options are, I think we should let them choose what they would like to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I actually won't be at the next meeting. I'm gonna be on vacation, but I would vote for the hybrid option if I'm voting now.
Yep.
But either way is fine. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay. Well, appreciate the heads up, but maybe we should consider it and see how you feel after thinking about it for the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And I can maybe even send out an email and we can kind of talk.
Okay.
Do a poll, anonymous poll or something to see people's feelings on returning or doing a hybrid approach.
Yeah.
Okay. I will let you kick off the meeting then.
Okay, thanks. Anything else before we get to the presentation? Okay, well, Deb, looks like the screen is yours.
Okay, let's get into, let's see. Are you seeing, what are you seeing? Presentation?
Yes, it's not full screen. We see, looks like just, there we go. Now we're getting better.
Now it has the notes on the side.
Oh, okay. Let me change that, swap that display. How's that?
There you go.
Nice.
Better?
Good.
Okay, good. All right, well, meeting number 2 for wastewater rates. This is our process diagram. At meeting number 1, we talked about revenue. We went into detail about revenue from both the rates and other fees and charges. We talked about the different types of reserves and the current and projected future reserves. We also talked about the revenue requirements, the costs for the system that the rates need to cover. We went into detail about the operation and maintenance costs, the current debt service, and there is no new debt service assumed in the plan. The capital improvement plan and the corresponding cash flow needed to fund that plan. And various contingencies and the reserves in terms of reserve targets on the cost side. This meeting, we're going to, is typically the case, we allow 2 meetings for each system, and that's because we're working on the analysis, we, the consulting team and staff. So we make refinements as we go along. And also there's a lot of material, particularly for water and wastewater, because you've got first to understand the revenues and the costs, and then the rate structure. So this meeting will focus on just some refinements to the financial plan that we developed over the last 2 weeks, and also then the rate structure and the sample bills based on the projected rate increases. So first, a little recap, very brief recap, that the plan generally is consistent with the 2020 financial plan. The Citizen Rate Review Committee meets every 2 years. Ned and a couple other folks were part of that. And basically the revenues, costs, and projected rate increases are consistent with what we projected in that plan. Nobody predicted the pandemic, and there were some temporary savings, I guess, due to some reduced activity in some maintenance areas and staff vacancies during the initial phase of the pandemic. The projected capital improvements are significant over this planning period, as they have been. That's just the nature of utility systems. And the plan includes a 3.5% per year revenue increase or overall rate increase, as has been the case historically. We showed you this chart last time, and the bars show you the types of expenses, and the big one being the capital improvements, particularly in this current budget year, or the transfer for capital expenditures over to the capital fund. And the line on top is the revenue, and then the other two lines, we've got a dark blue line is the minimum balance, or kind of that target balance, ending fund balance, and the lighter blue line is the projected ending fund balance. So basically starts a little bit below the target line, but then kind of stays slightly above that target ending fund balance. That was the preliminary projections. As I said, we've made some refinements. And so one of the things that happens generally in between updates is the city makes some changes to the way it does some of its financial accounting reporting, and money gets moved around a little bit. This is the preliminary reserve projections, just showing you the dollars from the last the preliminary plan. So the future minimum reserve target is about $6.5 million, that dark blue line in the graph I showed you before. And you can see that in this initial chart that we showed you 2 weeks ago, the ending operating / capital balance was almost $8 million. So a bit above that target. And then the SDC fund balance we consider separate. That money is very specific to growth-related capital improvement projects. The city can only spend that on certain projects, and the revenue is much more variable than the rate revenue. And so that's really a separate pot of money. It is available for capital improvements, but again, it's much more regulated in terms of what it can be used for.
Can we go back to that table for
Sure.
a moment?
Yeah.
I'm having trouble relating these numbers to the previous graph. If the target on top is 6.5 million, and that's what you've got close to it on that, I don't see how these numbers, which total out a lot higher, are related to that.
So the dark blue is the 6.5 million. So these are gaps of a couple of million on this axis here. And so the 28, 29 total for the operating capital is about 7.9 million. This is showing you the operating fund balance, but so 7.9 million is close to 8 million. You see this line here is about 8 million.
Right.
So that represents this is, again, the operating portion, but most of, the capital portion in the last year is very small, because we're only in our financial plan only transferring over to the capital fund that which is needed to fund the improvements over the planning period. In the initial year, the capital balance is significantly higher because there's a big transfer of funds over to the capital fund to pay for projects over the next few years. But in the end, we basically show that that's all spent. And so this 9.9 million is, so the 4.7 million is not, is the number that's not captured in this line. But in the end, this blue line is basically consistent with this number here, less the 233,000. So it's, yeah, it's, in this table, I'm combining both capital fund reserves as well as operating fund reserves. And then below the line is the SDC fund balance, which is not shown at all on that graph.
Right.
Because it's those separate funds. But I think because this capital fund balance in the first year is so high, and that's the piece that's not captured here. Does that help?
A little bit. What is the other category, the row that's labeled other in your table? What does that represent? That's pretty substantial, and it more than doubles.
Oh, it's just, well, so you'll see I've renamed that because I agree. I thought, well, I could have, it's basically undesignated. So we set the operating contingency to be 60 days of operation and maintenance requirements. So that's just a calculated amount. The debt service reserve is equal to 1 year's worth of debt service. So again, a calculated amount. The capital is basically what the budget said would be transferred over to capital. And that's, you know, where we stand today. That's a separate fund, and that's the amount of ending fund balance based on the budget. Other is everything else. So it's the undesignated or unspecified portion of what's left in the operating fund after you pay for your expenses, and you set aside these designated reserves. So just think of it as undesignated, because the next chart that or the next graph or table that I show you, I'm going to start labeling it as undesignated. But it's all the same money. It's just we're saying, okay, we've got our operating contingency, check. We've got our debt service reserve, check, you know, and then what's left is the additional reserves that helps to meet our overall target, but it's not designated for any particular use. Though that's it, the segue into the next discussion about equipment replacement reserve. We have a new designated reserve.
Correct. I have just one last question.
Sure.
And
yeah.
I'm not an accountant, so I don't understand all the background. Can we go back to that table?
Yep.
So if we have minimum target on top of $6.5 million, and all of these numbers and categories and estimates they're all reserves, right? Why is the bottom line triple what the minimum is recommended? Like 19 million compared to 6.5 million, if that's all we're needing.
Okay, so it's not the recommended, it's just kind of, this is our floor. We shouldn't drop below that. What this doesn't account for is we know that you've got $31 million of capital improvements in the next planning period.
Right.
So we better be at a healthy fund balance today, because you've got to meet that $31 million over the planning period. So you can see that the reserve drops significantly. And in fact, that the some of that 31 million is going to be paid for through SDCs because it is qualifying improvements. Some of it will be met with just the annual rates that we bring in. So not all of the CIP is being funded out of the savings account. Some of it's being funded just from the annual revenue that comes in, but it's not sufficient. And that's why we're drawing down reserves over the planning period. The fact that you have significant reserves means that the rating, you don't have to issue debt, and the rate increases don't have to be higher than what they already have been identified as.
Okay. Last question, I promise. So in
Ask
other
away.
words, if you take the bottom line, 19 million, and you subtract out, I suppose, the 6.5 that you want to leave on the floor, does that mean you've got what, 13 million or so for capital projects and everything else? Is that how this works?
Well, the 6.5 is really the operating slash capital. It doesn't, SDCs really should, I don't really include that when we're evaluating this. We're not so much considering the SDC fund balance because of its variability and because it is designated just for those growth projects.
Okay.
So it's the 6.5 million is the metric, is that target for this subtotal operating slash capital. That's
okay.
That's the one. So
okay.
So yeah, it's a little bit above what's that floor, but it doesn't include designated CIP specific reserves because, haven't generally operated that way. But what we do is, and why the city does this every couple of years, is to say, okay, do we have enough money? And, what does our rate increase need to be to make sure we can meet over the longer period, continue to cash fund these improvements, both from the current revenue, and are we drawing down our reserves at a, at a sustainable level?
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Good questions, yeah. So one of the changes since the last rate cycle was that there were some changes to how equipment replacement is handled within the funds of the city. Used to be a separate fund that and Katie can correct me if I go astray here, all the fund accounting, but basically the funds, the utility systems, transportation, water, sewer, et cetera, used to pay into a fund called equipment replacement. And then there would be expenses, equipment would be replaced out of that fund. And the change is that rather than the money, everybody all the other funds transferring money over to that separate fund, equipment replacement would be accounted for within each of the individual funds. So now we've got to account for equipment replacement needs in both the reserves as well as the ongoing expenses. And so that's the main change that was made to the financial plan to account for that modification and how the funds were set up. The model was, our financial plan model wasn't set up that way with the last rate cycle. And so that over the last few weeks, we've been making those changes. So these are the revised numbers that in terms of our reserves. Now you can see in the table here, we still have the operating contingency, the debt service, the capital, and now we have equipment. It's equipment slash vehicles. And the and then the undesignated is what's left over after all that. Used to be called other. So we basically split other into equipment reserve and undesignated. Mm-hmm. So the estimated reserve need or target for that equipment replacement in the current year is 1.7. There was, when that old equipment replacement fund was dissolved, money was transferred out to the individual utility systems. And sewer got $285,000 of that. But staff has identified the need, a greater need for that reserve. And and that's the 1.7 million. So there was some money that came in to take to fund that additional reserve, but not sufficient. So we had to carve out some of that other money to be that set aside. There's also so the rates need to, there are expenses that are going to accrue against that sort of that set aside for vehicle replacement and other equipment needs. The projected annual amount is $250,000. We've set the financial plan up to basically contribute annually to that reserve $150,000. Plus there will be auto sales revenue associated as the city sells off older vehicles, then replaces them, et cetera. So there's some additional revenue from that. But overall, the expenses, the combined capital outlay equipment expenses are slightly higher than in the prior version of the plan that you saw. So now these numbers, all of a sudden that 6.5 million target becomes the reality here in terms of what we're looking at with the operating capital reserve. So plan still works, but it just that the actual projected reserve is now basically consistent or right on with that minimum reserve target. So this chart has been changed. The only real change to this chart is to show separately the, we've got the ending fund balance and then the combined with the ending fund balance with the equipment replacement reserve. So this new green line, it's a little hard to see because it's also on top of green bars at the very bottom here, shows that equipment replacement reserve. Then you've got the combined, which is the dark black. And that's the one, you know, really to pay attention to, that it still meets that, what I now have as the dashed line being the minimum balance target, that 6.5 million. So we will model, we'll be making the same changes to the water and the stormwater. So, you know, we won't be showing you one version and then a revised version because we've now got that sorted in all the models and all the plans. But just wanted to present to you, this is the updated financial plan that it now incorporates wastewater equipment and vehicle replacement within this fund. Is there any questions on that?
No.
So the 3.5%, no change in the assumption about the revenue, overall revenue increase is the good news. Okay, so we're gonna now pivot towards the, you know, so the 3.5% is sets the overall revenue requirement, the size of the cost pie, we say, for the utility. And now we have to figure out how much each customer class is going to contribute to that and how the rate components would be modified to raise that additional revenue. Another refresher on what the current rate structure looks like and the current rate levels. We have the fixed charges, the fixed service charges that don't vary from month to month. And then we have the volume charges, which are different depending on which customer class you are. If you're a domestic strength waste, i.e. you have fairly low concentration of pollutants in your wastewater discharge, you pay a lower rate than a commercial market or car wash or something else that has higher pollutant load. And then commercial 3 is the highest, most expensive waste. And that is restaurants primarily. So if everybody discharged the same quality of wastewater, then we would basically charge everybody the same cost per unit of volume. But that's not the case. And therefore it's important every time we look at this to just kind of check back to see, has there been any change in the cost structure such that have the flow costs gone up more than the costs associated with dealing with the pollutant load, because that helps to inform how we should allocate that overall revenue increase, that 3.5%, to these different customer classes. So we go through a process that's called cost of service analysis, following standard industry principles. And it has lots of, that's why we build these computer models, because we've got to take all these operation, maintenance, and capital costs, and then we distribute them first to these functional categories. So we have to understand, what are the costs associated with collection, taking the wastewater from your house or your business, pumping it if needed, then treating it, getting rid of the solids, analyzing the wastewater, sending you a bill, dealing with customer service. These are all functions performed by the wastewater system. And depending on those functions, costs are incurred. Some of those costs are just kind of related more, or incurred more to address the wastewater flow, the quantity of flow. Some are related to dealing with building enough capacity or trying to address wet weather flow that gets into the system. And Karen talked about that, the infiltration and inflow, some of the projects that relate to infiltration and inflow. And other costs relate to some of the treatment processes are specific to getting out the pollutant loads so that the city can discharge the wastewater and meet its regulatory permit requirements. So we take those costs and we go through this allocation process, and we come up with flow costs, infiltration and inflow costs, and strength related costs. And then we allocate those customer classes based on their contribution of flow and load. We call BOD and suspended solids the load. And then we design the rates to recover those costs. So just to give you a sense as to how the costs are allocated into these different functional categories first, a lot of it has to do with the volume. So the collection system, those pipes, the pumping, about 8%. Headworks is a part of the plant. That's where the water comes into the plant. The treatment is really, those processes that deal with the wastewater and get it to clean enough that we can discharge it. Sludge handling is dealing with the particular, the solids and I'm not an engineer, so Karen, if I'm going, off here, you could correct me. The lab is again addressing the water quality, monitoring to make sure that the permit requirements are being met. Customer service and support is just those costs that are supportive of all of these functions, but we allocate kind of on an indirect basis. So it includes, administrative support and things like that. But it's also some of the supervisory time within each of the, public works kind of general support functions. When we then take those categories and we allocate them to these service characteristics so that we can allocate them to customer classes, you see that the blue is really all the volume related stuff. The dark blue being infiltration and inflow, which is a very significant part of the wastewater costs. building pipes, pumps, things big enough to deal with those peak flows, which are the result of not so much customer flows, but other flows that get into the system during the wet weather. And then the two green bars are the strength, the wastewater strength related costs, biochemical, oxygen demand, total suspended solids. And then about 5% of the costs are related to billing and customer service. So this is pretty standard breakdown of the how costs are incurred to address, handle wastewater from customers. So to get to the rates, the infiltration and inflow costs, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, for customers that received years ago grants for helping build treatment works, it being one of the agencies that recommends or helps to establish what's equitable and industry accepted practice with respect to rate setting. And the Water Environment Federation also has its manual on rate setting. And because infiltration inflow costs are not directly related to just the discharge from customers, there are the accepted approaches for how those costs are recovered are either, on a per customer basis, on a flow basis, or a combination of the two. And it's been long-standing practice and policy, I should say practice and the recommendation of the committee to allocate those costs primarily on a fixed per customer equivalent dwelling unit basis. And so 80% of the infiltration inflow costs are recovered through the fixed charges. And that helps to meet the revenue stability goals of the utility. And that being a significant part of setting resilient, keeping the utility financially resilient as there's fluctuations in water use and things. So the billing charge is obviously just a flat charge per bill, and it recovers those customer service costs and billing. The infiltration and inflow costs, like I said, 80% through the fixed component and 20% through the volume or variable charge. The volume charge also recovers all the average wastewater flow costs as well as the strength related costs, the BOD and the suspended solids costs. So when we, and we have, so we can determine from, maybe just go back here for a second. So we get the costs in these categories, and then from billing records, we know we can estimate average flow for customers, and then using standard concentrations of wastewater for restaurants and domestic strength customers, we can estimate within reasonably accurate numbers what these strength contributions are. And we compare that back to what goes into the plant to make sure that our estimates are realistic. So when we get through that process, we get to, we can compare what the revenue that's been recovered under the current rates versus revenue that would be recovered through the updated cost of service rates. And so we showed you at the last meeting, this part of the chart, this on the table, the 21-22 revenue by class and the percentages. So what I've added to this table is in 2023-24, after, if these new rates are implemented, what the cost of service by class would be. Obviously, the total revenue is higher because it includes 3.5% increase, 3.5% increases. And there's some minor shift in cost. Single family residential goes up very slightly. Multifamily stays about the same. And then there's a slight reduction for commercial. And that has to do with the fact that the fixed charges increase slightly more than the volume charges. Residential customers make up the majority of the customer accounts. And so when we have increases in the fixed charges, they pay, pick up slightly more than as a percentage basis than the commercial customers. So this is what
Can I ask a quick question? In the last column here on the total service charge, why does it go down?
I just
from
noticed that too.
3187 to 2011.
My eyes went to that directly too. That's something I'm going to have to look at, because the next slide shows the 37 to 38%, an increase in the fixed charge, right. And that resulted, from those cost allocations. So I apologize. I didn't catch that until just the same moment as you. So either I've got a, formula issue. It may not be picking up the billing charge is what I'm thinking, because the difference between those two numbers looks like the billing charge. So I'll take a look at that.
Right. So it should be another 3.5% higher.
Oh, no, I don't think it's that. I think it's just missing a component, but we'll send you out a corrected version after the meeting. So
no hurry. Thanks.
Yeah, but you laser focus there caught that. So as you can see from this chart, part of the practice has been to gradually increase the revenue that's recovered via the fixed charge relative to the volume charge to the standard, up to the standard of about 40%. And this would bring you very close to that. And so it not only would address the cash needs, but it also addresses kind of that balancing of objectives with respect to keeping the rates resilient and stable over time, the revenue stable over time. This may change too. I've got to take a look at, again, those rates, but basically what we see here is about the first year, you're going to make recommendations for 2 years. The last rates that were adopted as part of the last cycle go into effect January 1 of 2022, which is the fiscal year 2022. You're making recommendations for January 1 of 2023 and 2024. So this is just showing what a typical residential, multifamily, commercial customer, and you can see their monthly use in 100 cubic feet, CCF, is there, and then what the current bill is and what the proposed would be that would incorporate both the 3.5% annual increase as well as the cost of service analysis. And as I mentioned, because not everybody the first year would go up the same because of the cost of service analysis, pushes more to the fixed charge, less to the volume, you do see the overall 3.5% be slightly different as it relates to specific customer classes. And but in the second year, then it's pretty much everybody goes up roughly the same percentage-wise. That percentage increase is looking at the $2.76, $2.65 for a single family customer. That's the monthly increment increase. Multifamily is showing much larger customers of multiple units. That's why the bill changes are significantly higher. So these are just based on the averages within the class. So we talked about this process is about looking at both the rate increases, the rate structure, and the reserves, which we've talked about quite extensively. We did do, in the process of doing rate comparison with other communities, and I can show you the sewer bills. Now this is based on 500 cubic feet, so a little different than that chart I just showed you. The average is like 4.5% when you calculate it, but generally when sewer rate comparisons are done, they are done for 500 cubic feet. So at 500 cubic feet, your sewer your sewer bill, $77.41 under this is based on the January 1, 2022 rates. These are all fiscal year 22 rates. So some of these went into effect July 1, others go into effect January of 22, like yours does. You're the highest of these sewer rates, as you can see, the sewer bills. The bars in this case represent the different components. So the fixed and the volume charge, and there's a lot of, I think we talked last time about there's a lot of, it's difficult to make comparisons, apples to apples comparisons with the different cities here. And one of the main differences is that many of these cities are served by a regional utility that is Clean Water Services. And so I think Sherwood, Tigard, Cornelius, a number of these are customers of a regional utility. Kaiser gets service with Salem and some other districts. And Forest Grove, I think, is also a part of Clean Water Services. So there's economies of scale associated with that, and tend to have, you're spreading the costs. You have major treatment plants that are serving lots of different cities and spread the costs over all those cities. Some of those do have their own individual surcharge on there because the cities are also responsible for their collection system, part of their collection systems. There's also differences in, for example, how much the utilities contribute or are charged by the general fund for like improvements in the right-of-way management services. And in 2018, Newberg, the city council increased the franchise fee, which is charged to the utilities, not only the water, wastewater, stormwater utilities, but also the electric utility and other franchises. That charge went from 5% to 7%. So that was a 2% increase in the water or water sewer bills. These other cities, so Clean Water Services, for example, it depends. That's a very local. Some of the cities charge 0 in terms of the franchise fee. Others charge up to 5%. Newberg's is highest of these cities at 7%. So that's part of it. But the flip side is, it just gets complicated. Part of the reason the city increased the franchise fee from 5 to 7% is because of funding needs in the general fund. These other cities also have those same issues, but some of those have dealt with that in other ways by raising other fees. So, or taxes, local option taxes. So it gets really complicated to try to really understand the burden, the financial burden, when you have all those different factors. Karin could probably speak more to some of the treatment differences. I know that some utilities have, you discharge into different receiving bodies of water that have different regulations, and you're at different places in your repair and replacement and those sorts of things. But
can I make a comment and kind of a question? This, yes, I understand all of the complications and how difficult it is to compare, but it's still rather disconcerting, the bottom line, that we're by far the highest. Okay. And a couple of years ago, I know there were only a couple of us here, we had another consultant came and gave a comparison between Newberg and several other cities of similar population sizes, and Newberg's overall water rates were right in the middle. So what I'm wondering is, are these higher sewer bills, let's say, counterbalanced by lower the water supply part of the bill? Or in other words, let's say next week or next meeting or the meeting after, will we get a similar comparison for the water use and treatment?
You will. We're going to bring those to you.
Okay.
With each system, and then
okay.
At the end, when we look at everything together, we'll look at the total.
Okay.
So yeah, that was you're right. The last 2 years ago, there was another consultant who specialized in doing that kind of work, who looked not only at the rates, but was also looking at different financial metrics of the cities. I think, debt, amount of debt, and all of that kind of stuff. That isn't part of this process, but what we did do is go back to the cities that had been part of the comparison in 2018, when the city had done it in-house. And so we updated those charts. And so we will be bringing you the other systems, which will include transportation also, because that wasn't looked at previously. That's a fairly new fee. And so
okay.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully the others look more favorable, because this one sure doesn't.
Go ahead, Karin.
The other thing I will say is we need to remember, we also have especially on the sewer side, we have quite a bit of debt that we have to pay back. And those were decisions that were made, several years ago.
Right.
And not anything that we can change at this stage in the game either. So just one thing to keep in mind. And there's a lot of these other jurisdictions that don't have that kind of debt. But like Deb said, you have Sherwood, Tualatin, Forest Grove, Tigard, Cornelius are all under one, all under Clean Water Services. And then if you go to Milwaukee, Oregon City, they're under actually Clackamas County's joint use. And Lake Oswego is actually served by the city of Portland at this point. So, those are some other things to keep in mind, is, as Deb said, is they can spread those costs out that they have to a lot larger base than what we have today. So.
McMinnville used to have the highest sewer rates in the state many years ago. And when they paid off their debt, they went to all cash funding. And now you can see they're right within that, more within the middle pack. So it does, you will see over time, you know, cities that are, you know, at the top moving down as different, you know, they're at different places in their, both their financing and in their capital improvements. So.
Deb, I think Ron has a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can't see everybody. Oh, hi, Ron. There he is.
Is there an option, excuse me, is there an option for us to be grouped together with other cities, like the ones that are spreading the costs? I don't think that's an option, but I want to make sure I ask that.
Sure. I mean, we can look at other cities. This was the, I think these were selected in part because of their.
Not what I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh, different question. Sorry. Go ahead.
The question is right now, Karen's going to answer it. Sharing the actual municipality as far as the actual service and stuff across multiple cities versus just a Newberg system.
Go ahead, Karen.
become a regional system. You know, the only city that would make sense at this point would be the city of Dundee, possibly. You know, we are looking, when we get to water, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we are looking at combining systems possibly with Dundee and a little bit in the future. We've also talked about ultimately connecting up with McMinnville. Takes a 12-mile pipeline. So that wouldn't necessarily be cheap to make that happen either. You know, there's some pretty big capital costs to make that happen. You know, one thing is with where we are within the county and against other jurisdictions is we're not close to anybody to make that really easy to do. So I would say it's not completely out of the picture, but the feasibility, again, the capital costs associated with that would be pretty extensive in order to make that happen.
Do we know, second question. First, thank you. And we just need to capture that piece. Second question, the total cost. You said it's complicated. The bills that I get per month are not complicated. They are what they are, right? I mean, we know that we have city and sewer, we have whatever. So the question is, are we going to have a comparison, not just of sewer, not just of water, but everything, including property tax? Because I think when people came to us last time and said, my gosh, they'll point this part out. The bigger one that they pointed out was water. And the question was, gosh, you know, it's not overall expensive here. And I wonder if property taxes are offset. That's how how does Newberg compare overall, right? As far as that price point.
So let me jump in here a little bit, Ron, is yes, we will, at the end, you will get a total comparison with the water, the wastewater, stormwater, and transportation bills all together in one. And we will also add in the public safety fee. Isn't there, there's another fee, I think.
There's another one.
Too, which is not the purview of this group to review, but we will show all of it in one fell swoop. The property taxes, I don't know that we've ever shown those before. I suppose we might be able to, but it doesn't really affect, I mean, it could affect your overall
price point.
Cost of living, but it doesn't always necessarily relate. How much water and sewer you use doesn't necessarily relate to the value of your home.
Right. But the actual fees associated with the city, aren't there some associated with the property tax for the city? So in addition to the utilities, there's that piece that they're getting, and there's some, because there's city debt involved, and how they approach it. If I understand Deb right, there's multiple different ways in how you approach city debt. Right.
And I think maybe some of that's in the budget per se, is where all of the tax money goes to. So your property taxes don't go to your utilities at all. And so but there's probably, my guess is we've got a couple of graphics in the budget itself that talks about where the various, how that tax rate is broken down. And maybe Katie can get that and send it out to the group for the next meeting. That may help. But I want us to be a little bit careful in the sense that we don't, for us to make a comparison and add it onto your bill, there's a lot of big assumptions that have to be made, and they may or may not be accurate or really representative of what people are doing or having done. Does that make sense? So let's get to what we have, and let's see where we can get to. How's that? Does that make
it does, and I appreciate the challenge and you trying to capture that. Then the question comes, what is the long range? I can look at my neighbor's straight face and said, yeah, we're the highest today. In 10 years from now, after we get down our debt in the sewer investments, it's going to be normal. Can I say that? Right now, I don't have the data to say that. Right now, the highest cost, the 3.5% increase, and most of us don't get a 3.5% increase in our pay. It's a bitter pill to swallow and to say, this is okie dokie. Right? And so the question is how, I know there's a smart way to do this. And last time we walked through it and we justified every dollar. Going back on the flip side of it, I'm still eating away at me the fact that it's so high. The question is, when does it level out? You know, okay, cool, it's high because we have debt. We're going to have debt paid off and it's going to drop back down the next amount of years. Okay, cool. And that's normal. Okay. I think, excuse me, a longer range view of this cost and projections of us and others may help go off and say, oh, this is normal. We're just at the high point. Everyone's at the midpoint or lower. It's things have been flowing as people upgrade systems.
So what I'll say is that we can get you a little bit more information about what's going to happen to ours long term, but there's, again, some big assumptions that have to be made. But I don't have any way to figure out what Tigard's rates are going to do in the next 10 years. They have way many other things going on. Yeah, you can go to history, but
I mean, how else do you justify the large volume? So right now today, we have increased costs because we have increased upgrade that we did. Right, that's the story with this. So cool, this is going to drop down at some point. I think we know when that's going to happen for our system. They can give us a reflection point. I'm just trying to be able to justify this to my neighbor, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly bring you, there is the effluent reuse debt, which is a portion of the sewer debt, does drop off. I think it's somewhere in the 5 to 7 years. I don't have the projections. Well, we can look back at I don't think it's within let's look, we'll go back to that chart here. The debt transfer, it's a little hard to see here, but it definitely by 28, 29, I think that's when that effluent reuse debt drops off. But I think I calculated that is something like 3% of the total. The really big debt was associated with that major plant upgrades, which, what year was that, Karin? It just,
yeah,
like 6 years ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We just finished it in 2016. So yeah.
That's going to be with you a long time. And while the plant, you've got that debt that you're going to be paying off. It's a 20-year term. You've got, and then now a lot of the work now is related to dealing with flow related stuff, right? Hess Creek and some of the pipeline stuff.
Yeah, so, some of the things that we are doing, is we've got pipes that are old. So we're having to replace and or line those pipes. We also have pipes that, as we noted before, are in the middle of the creek. Not a great place for pipes to be. So we've got some in the capital side, we have some significant cost to pull those pipes up out of the creek, which will help in the long term, in the sense that less maintenance on those pipes. And the idea is that there would be less, we wouldn't have to replace those pipes as quickly. But the other piece is we have our capital program. As we do projects, we do look at this every year, every 2 years. We relook at, does it make sense? Do we need to do this project? Do we not need to do this project? Can we push it out? And part of the idea is to be more cash funded, as McMinnville has done. Again, we have to deal with paying the debt off, and that's not anything that we can change. And so yeah, we can get you some of the information, Ron, but I don't know that we're going to be able to completely satisfy all of those answers. And then, but I think at the end, you'll see where we land is not so different from all of the other jurisdictions when it's all said.
Yeah, and just clarify what I said about the, the other burden, looking at the total burden is when the city looked at what were different funding mechanisms for closing the gap on some of the general fund expenses. And it said, let's raise the franchise fee, all the franchise fees by 2%. Some other cities like Salem, for example, they implemented a new fee called an operating fee that recovers costs associated with police and parks and libraries. So that's like a new fee. So it's not, it didn't have an impact on their sewer fee, but it has an impact on the total fees that customers pay. So we can reflect those sorts of things wherever there's on the rate, the total rate burden. But yeah, it would be really hard to factor in the property taxes, and I don't think as relevant given that the utilities, are fee based. So we'll do some more work to provide a more robust view of the total utility services or fee statement when we get to the end. But in the meantime, we'll walk through each system, and certainly sewer is, I think, the most is the highest for you.
I have a really general question, and maybe it's too early for an answer, but with this recently passed infrastructure bill on the federal level, I heard Oregon is supposed to get at least $1.2 billion. Will any of that trickle down all the way to our level where it might help out on a capital project or two? Or three?
Karin or Katie, do you have any sense of that yet?
I don't know that I have a sense of it yet. What I will say actually is we are going to be getting, well, let me clarify. I have not actually read the final bill that came out, and I need to do that. But running up to the vote, Newberg actually had a project in that infrastructure bill that would help pay for one of our projects. We would still have to come up with the 20% match, but we would be getting about $460,000 towards a project. So, so that on the water side, that will help. It doesn't help on the sewer side. We are also going to be applying for, Yamhill County has about $6.5 million worth of water and wastewater grant funds through the ARPA money that they are offering up to all the jurisdictions within the county. It is a grant program. We are going to apply for 2 projects, one in wastewater and one in water. We'll see how competitive we are. I know, again, 6.6 million or 5 million isn't a lot spread over the entire county. So we'll see how much or whether we will get any of that money. We'll know that in February or January is when they said that they will let us know that. So that could affect some things. It's again, when you're talking, $31 million worth of capital, does, $500,000 make that much of a difference long term? Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to play that a little bit by ear.
Okay. So you'll have more of an idea of how much we get, let's say this winter, early spring, before we finalize rate recommendations, right?
Well, I'll know whether or not we've gotten the Yamhill County grant January, and I'll know for sure if one of the water projects did stay in the infrastructure bill.
Okay.
How quickly they will, start funding out the infrastructure bill, and then the state has to figure out how they're handing that money out, and that can be a year-long process.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
So we'll have to, look at it. We'll continue to watch it. And if we have the information before we finalize, we'll certainly provide that.
Okay. Deb, anything else?
Just to share next steps. So, and I'll just add to this verbally that I'm going to send out some revised, corrected slides. Any of the number, I'm going to go back and check those rates on that last year, and we'll send you any corrections on the wastewater side of things. We will try to chase down some more details, whatever we can provide to give you a better sense as to both what happens with how the future looks within our planning window here with respect to the rate increases and when debt service paid off, those sorts of things, as well as any other information. I know sometimes Clean Water Services projects out multiple years of rate increases. So any of that information that's readily available, we'll bring that back to you as well. Okay. And then our next meeting will be introducing the water system analysis and financial plan, and we'll go through that same process over the 2 meetings that we've gone through for wastewater, for water.
Okay.
That's all I had. December 1.
Right.
Back here on Zoom.
Yes. And do give some thought about meetings in January, as far as perhaps in the public safety building or hybrid type of model. Any other discussion or comments at all? Do we have any public comments that have come through?
We do not.
Okay. Well, if there's not anything else, last chance. I guess we're adjourned. Meeting is adjourned unless someone else has anything else.
So
all right.
You mentioned the safety building meetings in person.
As a possibility, yes, starting in January.
How does that get decided, or more importantly, vetoed, from my perspective?
We apparently the city council is going back to in-person meetings starting in January, I understand, right?
They're doing a hybrid approach.
Hybrid approach where Zoom is available.
But nothing's changed as far as the state mandates, though.
No.
Right?
No.
So they're choosing to make a change with all the expectations and all the pandemic is still alive. And you're asking, so how do we decide that? Do you decide that? Do we decide it as far as a group?
You decide as a committee. Our council is just now giving the option if committees choose to. Previously, we weren't allowing people to meet in person.
Is there a reason why they're changing when the state mandates haven't changed?
Maybe council will change this again because we were mandating vaccines and we were just told today by OSHA we cannot do that. So I think that has part of it. So maybe council will come back and say now we don't want to do in person, but from my understanding is they wanted to start allowing people to do a hybrid approach if they wanted to.
So it's really an option up to us. And I guess, oh, that's true. It was early on, Ron. Sorry about that, that we were just going to think about it and then come back in the next meeting, December 1st, and see what people would like to do from January meetings on.
And I might try and send out like an anonymous poll just to kind of get a consensus from the group to see if people feel comfortable meeting in person or, that's totally fine. If we want to continue this platform with Zoom, that's great. I just wanted to give the committee the option because council will, as far as I know, they are planning on resuming a hybrid approach in January and wanted to allow committees to have that option as well.
Okay. Anyone else?
I guess since we're here, we are recruiting for committees. The deadline to apply is November 29th. So if you know any neighbors that are interested in joining committees or commissions, then let them know.
Do you know what committees have vacancies?
So on the top of my head, I think affordable housing, planning, traffic safety, and budget, I believe. And then we're also recruiting for an ad hoc for ADA. They're only going to meet twice, but if anyone's interested, they can also apply to that one.
Okay.
Are you allowed to be on more than one committee at a time?
I will ask. I don't think there's anyone that we have that's in more than one at the moment, but I'll ask it. Oh, Karen?
We do. There's somebody who's on both the Planning Commission and the Traffic Safety Commission.
Robert was, but I don't know if that was an exception or if it's allowed.
Yeah, I think it's allowed. I don't think there's anything that says you can't.
Okay. Jennifer, I'll get back to you. I'll check with Sue just to make sure.
My understanding is you can be on two different committees. But I know the overall intent is to get as many different people from town involved in one capacity or another. But it is possible.
I'll send you an email
okay.
once I talk to Sue, since she's the city recorder, and then we'll.
Right.
Thank you so much for that question, Jennifer.
Okay, anyone else?
I do have a kind of off-topic question for Karen. I know you mentioned in a couple meetings ago that they were replacing like the stormwater drains like along river in that project. What is the ETA for that being completed, if you know at all?
You mean the water line in River Road, in River Street?
Yeah, like when they ripped up the streets and did like new street corners and replaced the piping and stuff.
So we have a couple of projects. We have a pavement project on 6th Street. If that's the one we're talking about.
Yeah, also, when's that going to be done?
Well, probably in the spring. Unfortunately, we started running into weather, and you can only pave when it's not raining. Like it has been. We need 3 to 4 days of good weather for them to get out there and make that pavement happen and have it hold really well.
Okay. Because the street is starting to flood over there during heavy rain.
Yeah, and the contractor needs to get back out and make sure that stuff is taken care of. And if they're not going to be able to get out there and finish the paving, they need to do some other things to have it hold up until the weather allows them. So
okay, cool. I was just curious because I noticed over the last week with all the streets flooding.
Yes. We will need to get that taken care of one way or the other.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you very much. I guess the meeting is adjourned.
Right.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.